The benchmark for world food commodity prices declined slightly in August as decrease in quotations for sugar, meat and cereals outweighed increase in those for vegetable oils and dairy products, according to Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations. For more insight on this, we are joined via Zoom by senior economist from FAO, Monika Tothova. Good evening and welcome to Daily Roundup.
Good evening from Rome. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, just to start off, how much did FAO food prices index change in August compared to the previous month or the same last time?
All right, let me first, before I answer your question, let me tell you what the FAO food price index is. We refer to it as a benchmark of global food commodity prices, but what it takes into account are changes in prices, export prices of cereals, vegetable oils, meats, dairy, and sugar. So in the index, we have these 5 big commodity groups, the price changes of which are calculated. In the latest reading in August, at that time, the index stood about 1% lower, then it was marginally down from its revised version for July, and it was about 1% lower than its value 1 year ago. What I would like to highlight, however, is the index is almost 25% below its peaks, which is reached in February 2022. You will recall February 2022, the war in Ukraine started, and markets got nervous, more uncertain, more volatile, and consequently the prices increased. So where we are now, we are on this stabilized trend when the month-to-month changes are generally quite low.
And perhaps just to tell us as well which specific food categories saw prices drop recently.
Yes, it's a matter of supply and demand, right? So what we had in the last edition in August was the prices of cereals, meats, and sugar went down, while the prices of vegetable oils and dairy went up. When I say, for example, prices of cereals, it's a composite prices as a group. So in that cereal price, you have wheat prices that went down because this is the time when the fresh supplies from the northern hemisphere are coming to the markets, while the maize prices, on the other hand, strengthen because of the concerns of the impact of heat waves in Europe, for example, also in the parts of US, on the grain formation. At this point on the northern hemisphere, the maize is in the crop development stage, and what you will see is that the harvest starts around October and November.
Of course. So do the recent changes in the FAO food price index hint any long-term trends in food prices?
Well, it's a bit tricky to say. When we look at the markets right now, we see compared to what we saw, for example, 2 years ago, to a certain extent even last year, but the situation was already stabilizing. We see markets for these basic food commodities, as we call them, we see them pretty stable. That doesn't mean that a shock cannot happen. We didn't expect that there would be the shock of the war in Ukraine that had all this impact. We certainly didn't expect the other shocks that happened, including the COVID-19 pandemic. So if the situation remains stable as it is now, with relatively stable weather, of course, you can have droughts, you can have floods in different parts of the world, but generally, those events do not affect the production globally. So if the situation remains relatively calm, as it is now, then at least for the crops that are grown across the globe, and you have this, let's say, risk mitigation, that the production decreases on one end, production increases somewhere else, we are in a stable situation. However, as I said, the shock can come and we can experience a more sudden hikes, for example.
Monika, what could the current trends in the FAO food price index mean for consumers and the global market in general?
So the consumers, that's an excellent question. The consumers, what we have in the FAO price index, those are international quotation. Those are commodities that are in bulk. You know, we are buying, Egypt might go out there and buy several millions of tons of wheat in one shipment, and it ships it to its ports, right? While shipping it, the price increases slightly because you need to account for the shipping cost, but we are talking about these prices for commodities itself, such as wheat, grain, for example, that are shipped in bulk. This is not what the consumers are buying. Consumers are buying flour, they are buying bread, they might be buying pasta, they are buying products that are produced from these commodities. So they are paying also for additional transportation costs that gets the goods to them. They are paying for the labor that breaks the bread, the electricity that goes on the milling, etc., etc. So the commodity price is a relatively small price, depending how many steps they are in the production, but it is still a relatively small share often of the final production. Now, the good news is that the share, the cost that the processors, for example, are paying, this part is relatively stable. So what happens at the consumer's level, we need to account for these additional costs and additional factors, which are then very country specific.
And how did sugar, meat, and cereal prices affect the overall FAO food price index in August?
So these prices, all of these, the ones you mentioned, cereal, sugar, meat, they decline. So by declining, they brought down the total index. The biggest decrease, if I remember, in fact, was for sugar. And you might recall that the sugar prices at one point, not that long ago, were really high. And this decline, which was almost 5% compared to July, and as much as 24%, over 20% compared to 1 year ago, with sugar reaching the lowest level since October 22, was mainly driven by the improving production outlook in Thailand, in India, following favorable rainfall. Sugar prices are also very much linked to the crude oil prices because to a certain extent, in some cases, the bioethanol produced from the sugarcane can be seen as a substitute for crude oil prices, so they are to a certain extent moving together. So lower crude oil prices means also lower sugar prices.
Yeah. So were there any food categories that saw price increase, and how did that impact your food price index?
Well, we saw experience in these last months changes for vegetable oils and for dairy. For vegetable oils, this change was very small. It was 0.8%. It's kind of part, you can think about it, a normal price developments, prices fluctuate. So when we talk about the small changes, it's not particularly concerning. The dairy prices increased by over 2%. And again, there was quite a bit of difference commodity dairy product by dairy product. It might be worth highlighting here that the butter prices, for example, reached an all-time high, which was mainly underpinned by increased demand for deliveries.
Yeah. So before we let you go, any final thoughts as far as the food price index is concerned?
Well, it is a monthly release, so I do invite you, if you are interested, to follow it closely, how the situation develops. Month-to-month increases are interesting, but what is even more interesting is to watch the development over time. right? What happened compared to, if we think about that now we are in September, we were talking about the August issue. It is very interesting to compare it with the developments 1 year ago and see how the situation changed.
Thank you so much for being with us this evening and giving us details on that index.
Thank you.
All right. That was the senior economist from FAO, Monika Tothova. She just gave us a brief on the index of the food prices. We'll be right back after this break.